From courtside of the virtual hardwood, it's the NLSC Podcast, a weekly show for basketball gamers and hardcore hoopheads. Andrew with you once again, joined as always by my co-host Derek, aka D4-3. Derek, there's a lot of talk about skill gaps these days. It's become a very controversial issue with NBA 2K. We certainly have some thoughts on the matter, so please, tip us off.
Yeah, most of this episode is going to be centered around that topic, what we believe represents true skill gap in a basketball video game, and what we think consumers truly want to see and experience. However, first, I wanted to talk about a couple recent sessions that we had playing two Xbox One games, NBA 2K14 and NBA Live 18. And the way we're connecting is pretty cool. And I thought our audience would appreciate this. So I have the Xbox app on my PC. And what that does is it allows me to stream to my PC from my console. And I can stream in either 1080p or 720p. And that app is completely free. So I boot up that app. You and I connect on Parsec. And Parsec allows your control to be recognized by the app and by my Xbox One. So I stream to my desktop, and we're playing my Xbox One console games over my PC. I'm the host, you're the client. It is just an awesome setup, an awesome experience. It's truly plug and play. And if people in our audience have an Xbox One and a PC, I recommend trying this.
Oh yeah, it just works so incredibly well. Like you say, plug and play. I'm just there connecting with Parsec. For some games, I have to sign into your Xbox as a guest. Other games seem to work a bit quicker, but that's just a very minor extra step. Yeah, very easy to set up, and we get to play these 8th generation games.
Yeah, games that we currently aren't playing on PC via emulation. Games like NBA 2K14, NBA Live 14, NBA Live 15, Live 16, Live 18, Live 19. You can connect on all of these games using this method, and it rocks. So let's talk about the first game we played. NBA 2K14, Xbox One, Raptors versus Grizzlies. We use the Raptors, a fun video game team, Andrew. We got Rudy Gay, DeMar DeRozan, so two slashers. Two guys that can hit the mid-range jumper. Both can shoot from three at times. Rudy Gay a little bit better. And we also have Kyle Lowry on that team. We have Terrence Ross for big dunks and athletic plays off the bench. We still have Valanciunas at the center spot. Just a really solid video game team. And we went against the grit and grind Grizzlies, which again, another good team. There's actually quite a few good teams to choose from and to play against on NBA 2K14 with the default rosters. This team has Marc Gasol, Zach Randolph, Tayshaun Prince. It has Mike Conley, and of course, Tony Allen, one of the greatest defenders of all time, according to Kobe Bryant. And yeah, we ended up pulling out that game. It was close throughout. The computer is always a challenge in that one, but we went down at one point in that game, but we always fight, Andrew. Got back into it, had some huge plays at the end of the game, going to Rudy Gay mostly, hitting some mid-range shots with him, some step backs. I hit a 3 with him. He also had a huge dunk that made it in the top 10 plays of the week. But yeah, that game can be so fun with the default rosters, playing against the CPU and playing co-op with another individual. That was a lot of fun.
I mean, unfortunately, no Terry Hansen in this version of 2K14. Not generated outside of my career, of course. But yeah, what a fantastic game 2K14 is to this day. That eco-motion engine just looks, feels so awesome. You can see some of the subtle differences in the dunks. That Rudy Gay dunk, how organic that looked, how awesome it felt. As soon as I saw that, I knew that's a top 10 play. You just know when there's an awesome dunk like that. Very satisfying win, absolutely.
DeMar DeRozan in that game had 20 points, Rudy Gay 28. On the other side, Marc Gasol killed us. I think he had 32 points. Really tough to stop him. Tayshaun Prince with a few mid-range jumpers. Mike Conley destroyed us from 3. I think he hit 5 or 6 threes in that game. But yeah, love the eco-motion engine. I still think that the gameplay is a little bit more balanced and well-rounded on NBA 2K14 for PC, Xbox 360, and PS3. But at the same time, I really enjoy both games. I actually do think that they made some improvements with NBA 2K15 as it relates to the shooting. NBA 2K15 also added signature size ups. Those do not exist in 2K14. The post game is a little bit better as well in 2K15. So there definitely are some advantages. I also think that they improved a bit on the foot planning. However, NBA 2K14 is just beautiful, Andrew, for the Xbox One. Those courts, the reflections, the jersey movement, all of it, just a really cool looking game. And the crowd is also incredibly into the action and active. And it made that entire fourth quarter extra special.
Oh, for sure. And a lot of people say that NBA 2K14 to this day, they still think it is the best looking NBA 2K. Definitely has a case. Love the CPU in NBA 2K14, how aggressive it is, how smart it is. If we left it open, it was taking advantage of that. Just pounding into Marc Gasol, as you said, just killing us inside. And yeah, I'll always go back to 2K14 very happily. Got my career going in my 7th season, obviously. And it is funny because, of course, it did take me a while to warm up to that game. But now that I have, yeah, I'm always willing to play it. You talked about emulation. They are making some advances with Shad PS4. NBA 2K14 for PS4 is actually playable on that emulator now. Spliff Curry Beats in our community has released a runtime that helps with compatibility, getting it to run on the emulator. So that's going to be something to keep an eye on, Derek, that emulation for PS4, because modding, actually modding the 8th gen version of NBA 2K14 could be a lot of fun.
Yeah, how cool would that be to get some more classic players in there, more classic teams, maybe all-time teams? Yeah, I would be all over that. Unfortunately, even if we can mod the PS4 version, we wouldn't be able to increase the mode depth. We wouldn't be able to make the game have multiple team selection in a season and more roster spots probably, et cetera. Like, we wouldn't be able to do that stuff. But it would be cool to get some new players and new teams in NBA 2K14 for the Xbox One or PS4. The next game that we played, Andrew, was on NBA Live 18. And you got excited when I brought this up. And Andrew asked me if I wanted to play something, and I immediately said, let's play Live 18. And he goes, that's a great choice. I know you're really fond of this game, and I know that it's one of your favorite lives on PS4 gen, if not your favorite. So I put two interesting teams on the floor. I had us control the Thunder, and this Thunder team has the big three of Carmelo Anthony, Russell Westbrook, and Paul George, and they have solid pieces around him. A young Jeremy Grant off the bench. We had Steven Adams at center. Mr. Thunder, Nick Collison, off the bench. But overall, not the strongest bench, but it's that starting lineup that is super fun to use. You got your slashing with Russell Westbrook. You got your mid-range and three-point shooting with both Paul George and Carmelo Anthony. You have explosive drives with both Westbrook and Paul George, including in the session that we had a top 10 play with Paul George where I cross up my defender and I do a 180 one-handed jam in traffic and a foul. And that is, you'll see that in a future top 10. But yeah, we put that Thunder team on the floor against the Orlando Magic. And Alfred Payton is on that Orlando Magic team. And you remember how weird his hair was, right? In real life. They nailed it. Yeah. In NBA Live 18. It is floppy. It is sticking out in the front. It looks exactly like it did in real life. They did a really good job with a lot of likenesses in that game. But that team has a young Aaron Gordon who absolutely posterized us a few times and had some awesome dunks. It has a young Jonathan Isaac who also had some big jams and big blocks on us. He was supposed to be a much bigger deal in the NBA than he ended up being. But in NBA Live 18, he's a force to be reckoned with, and he was doing a lot of damage to us, especially in the second half. But that Orlando Magic team also has DJ Augustine. So some pieces there, some fun pieces on that team. Evan Fournier, I believe, is slotted in starting at small forward. We went up big early. I had to raise the difficulty level. We had started on pro, and we would have beat them by 50.
Yeah,
right? It was too easy. They were
definitely.
missing everything. We were throwing it down on them, easily getting to the hoop, hitting all our shots. So I raised it to all-star, and that was a game changer. And I think that's a little bit too dramatic of a change, right? I think pro is way too easy on that game, and then just one level up, it's unbelievably difficult at times, but in a good way. It was a good challenge, I will say that. So we went up big early. I changed the difficulty when we were up 10-3. We ended up battling it out. I think we ended up losing this game by 8 points
Yeah.
in overtime. Yeah, in overtime. Huge plays from Russell Westbrook and Paul George. Russell Westbrook ended up with 32 points for us. Paul George had 18. Carmelo Anthony had 11. Didn't get much help from anybody else. Ferguson in the starting lineup is useless.
Yep.
Our bench, for the most part, was completely useless. I tried to bring Mr. Thunder in to give us some energy, some rebounding and whatnot, and he might as well have not been out there, right? Just absolutely killed by Aaron Gordon, Jonathan Isaac, and Alfred Payton. And yeah, it was tough to drop that game, but it was still a lot of fun. I think my biggest problem with NBA Live 18 is it's when they really brought in the canned sequences and the canned animations, right? They brought in a lot of that side-by-side stuff that's in NBA 2K. A lot of the blocks don't feel natural anymore like they did in Live 15 and Live 16. They feel canned, and you can kind of see them coming before they actually happened. So you also have like more canned steals. They don't feel as authentic as they do in Live 15 and Live 16. So I think that's why I don't like Live 18 sometimes as much as those other two lives I just mentioned. But at the same time, I see why you like it. I see the improvements that they did make, and that session was still fun.
Yeah, the canned sequences, you feel them coming. It's not necessarily as satisfying as a more organic feeling game, but I do still like it. I do think it has some great animations, some very rough ones as well, rough transitions, but as I've said before, when something looks good in Live 18 and 19, it tends to look pretty good. Of course, when it's rough, it looks really rough. Like you said, the likenesses, very impressive. You know, once again, the animation's a bit rough, but the player likenesses, very good. Live 18 and 19. The current players, and also the legends. Some very impressive legends faces, because I played with a lot of them in Ultimate Team, as I've said before. Great to see some new animations. Hadn't seen that 360 dunk before in Live 18, so that was exciting. That's always exciting when you go back and play a game and you see an animation that you've never seen before. And also, whenever Paul George was getting out of the break, I was waiting for him to break out the back scratcher windmill. That's one of my favourite animations in Live 18. I was hoping he might pull it out when he got one of those steals, went up for the open court dunk. Unfortunately, didn't see it in this particular game, but that is a very cool animation. Tough loss, obviously, but still a very fun team to play with. Like you said, a great video game team, that 2018 Thunder. Didn't quite have the fit, the pieces, especially the bench, like you said, to succeed in real life, but a lot of fun in video games. And we love playing with those teams in video games, Derek. Finding those video game teams that didn't succeed in real life, often for very understandable reasons, but on the virtual hardwood, just so fun to play with. You know, Melo a bit past his prime, not doing a lot of damage in that game, but yeah, Westbrook and George, pretty fun duo in a video game.
Yeah, definitely a fun video game team. Lastly, before we get to our main topic, one of the things that bothered me the most about Live 18 and Live 19 on offense was just the small dribbles. Everything's a small dribble. Like, you can't really go wide on a crossover and burst off of it. And players mostly move at the same speed. So, like, you're trying to do like an explosive move, and you just can't in those games. And I think that's always bugged me. And then when you actually start going towards the hoop on your drive, you really don't feel like you're really accelerating. So I feel like sometimes the action can feel very canned and at times dull.
A bit sluggish.
On Live 18 and Live 19. Yeah, just a bit sluggish. But they did do a pretty good job with a lot of the animations. And I see what they were going for, but I feel like they definitely could have done better as far as like the fun factor and the excitement factor.
It's that lack of acceleration, trying to explode with a move, explode to the bucket, or even in the open court, outrun your opponent. The CPU sticks to you a little bit too easily. You can't get that separation when you're running full sprint. Yeah, that lack of explosiveness, definitely a problem. And of course, the modes weren't as deep as they needed to be. A bit too much focus on the streets, although I have come to really like the streets in Live 18 and 19. It's a nice change of pace and different from what 2K was doing for those two games. In a good way in some ways, in a bad way in some others. But yeah, like you, I can see the vision of Live 18 and 19. They had something there, and we really need competition in the space. So it's a damn shame that Live just went away as it did.
I will say this. NBA 2K series, especially in the last couple of years, has done a lot better with the WNBA portion than what NBA Live 18 and Live 19 were doing.
Yeah.
I went back and played some WNBA on Live 18 and Live 19 over the last couple of days. And man, does it feel generic, rushed, and it's just super dull, right? Signatures are off all over the place. The likenesses are off most of the time. And at times you don't even have coaches on the bench. I just find that the WNBA portion on Live 18 and Live 19 was just such low priority. And it feels like they were trying to be the first to do it instead of being the first to do it well.
Yeah.
Right?
They didn't follow through. Yeah.
And they didn't follow through. And that's unfortunate.
Before we go on, a reminder that the NLSC podcast comes out every week on the NLSC, nba-live.com, as well as our YouTube channel. We're also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other podcast apps. If you're listening on any of those apps, we'd greatly appreciate a review. To keep up with the show and everything we're doing with basketball gaming in general, connect with us on social media. On Twitter and Facebook, we are the NLSC. We also have an Instagram, NLSC Basketball, and on YouTube, we're youtube.com/NBA Live Series Center. Once again, visit us at nba-live.com, where in addition to the podcast, you'll also find all of our original content, as well as our forum and modding community.
So let's talk about today's main topic. And I wanted to bring this up on today's show because of a tweet from Mike Wong. And this is it. He states, if you take 100 shots and average 40% make percentage with 0 badges, what would you expect your shot percentage to climb if you took these same exact 100 shots but were fully badged out? Now, this is Mike Wong tweeting this out. And he states 45 or 50%, 51 to 60%, 61 to 70%, or 70% plus. Now, I want you to think about what he asks here. He's stating that 2 gamers could take the same 100 shots, and it would be 40% for both players. But if one player had artificial boosts, like loaded with artificial boosts, what should his percentage be? What does that completely go against, Andrew? True skill gap.
Exactly.
Right? Because what he's saying is, you guys are taking the same shots, but because you're fully badged out, your percentage could be a lot higher. Or should it be a lot higher? He's asking the question. And this is the company that consistently promotes skill gap. And they talk about skill gap in the online modes and how they're trying to, get separation in that way with gamers. So this is my problem with this. A true skill gap shouldn't have any artificial boosts involved, right? It should be about how you're playing on the basketball court, the shots that you're taking, how you're releasing the ball with the form that you chose for your player. If layup timing obviously is on in the online space, it's, how you time your layups around the rim. Are you better than your opponents at timing those layups around the rim? Are you taking good shots, etc.? That's the type of stuff that should factor in when we talk about skill gap. But when you're talking about people taking all of the exact same shots, but one player shooting a higher percentage just because they have artificial boosts assigned to their player, that's the exact opposite of a true skill gap. And here is why I think this is happening, Andrew. The game makes a ton of money off of these artificial boosts, right? That's a big part of this. It's you build your player, you get your attributes up to a certain point, and when you hit certain tiers with your attributes or certain numbers with your attributes, you unlock these badges that you can assign to your player. And if you get those badges, you can do what Mike is talking about here. You can raise your shooting percentage over opponents who don't have that badge but are taking the same shots, right? Or now you can take bad shots or unrealistic shots and have a much higher percentage chance of hitting them over somebody who is taking better shots but doesn't have badges, right? So they're going to shoot a lower percentage on better shots than you are on worse shots. And that's why I always talked about the online space looking like a mess, right? Especially with a game like 2K26 where it felt like the worst shots that you can take in basketball, like off balance, constant step backs, fadeaways, all of that stuff, that those were the highest percentage shots in NBA 2K26 online. And there was a lot of people talking about that and upset about that, right?
Yeah.
But again, they make money off of these artificial boosts. People want to be able to have fun with the game. They want to be able to be an asset out on the court. They want to be able to be effective out there. So what ends up happening is people will put money in the game to avoid the grind, right? To be able to get to the point where they are effective out there, where they can unlock these badges and compete against these other players who have badges and are all badged out. The words of Mike Wong on this tweet. So if you take away the artificial boosts, if you take away those tiers, all of that stuff, that is a lot of money that goes away from the bottom line for Take-Two, right? For NBA 2K. So they can't have that. That's why these artificial boosts are so prominent. That's why they added 19 more this year. And so this has never been about skill gap, in my opinion. None of it. I feel like it's almost entirely to do with making more money for the company. Because if you really wanted true skill gap, Andrew, you could have your builds, right? And the attributes would have a ceiling based on the position of your builds. So like as a center, you wouldn't be able to make it so you're as quick as the guards. But you could master that center position and be better than other people who are centers in the game. You could take smarter shots. You could time your release better. You could actually be a better basketball player, on the defensive and offensive ends. Same with a point guard. If you have your build, you could have a ceiling of, okay, so you're a point guard. You're not going to be able to get like a 99 on block or a 95 on block. But you know what? These are the tiers that you can hit with that player. And now you can be the best point guard out there based on how you use your handle, right? Have you mastered those animations? What shot do you choose? And have you mastered the timing of that shot? Your release point and whatnot. Do you take smarter shots? Are you a better defender? Do you cut people off on drives more often? Are you good with your hands? Are you good at using stick defense and whatnot and going for blocks in a timely manner? Like, that's true skill gap in a basketball video game. Not all of these artificial boosts where two people can be doing the exact same thing, but one person can shoot 5, 10, 20, even 30% higher just because he's decked out with a badge. That's not true skill gap.
Absolutely not. And there are some restrictions with the My Player Builder. That if you are a certain height or weight or position, there are some caps. But there's definitely ways around them. The min-maxing that goes on, the metagaming, the broken builds, the OP builds. So the balance that you're talking about definitely isn't there. And the thing is with badges and traits and signature skills, since we're talking about NBA 2K14, that's where it began. 2K13, 2K14, 2K15 had the signature skills, kind of the forerunner to badges. I like them as a concept in the NBA side of things. They were a way of giving players that little extra boost in a specialty, a corner three, or being able to shoot under pressure, being able to hit heavily contested shots, being able to break ankles a little bit easier than other players. That made sense. Unfortunately, now that gameplay design is so oriented towards my career, my players, the online scene, they've become a much bigger deal, so much more impactful, to the point that they are artificial boosts. And we always say that, and we stand by it, because it's no longer just that reasonable boost to a player's ability, a real player's ability. It's what can I equip, what is my loadout to generate a result, like rim protector badges that just force misses when you're in the vicinity. Don't have to do anything, to your point. Don't have to position yourself well, contest at the right time, even put your arms up. You're just in the vicinity and that badge activates. You know, you have your back to the offensive player and it still activates and forces that miss inside. And they've talked about fixing that in the past, but it's never really been truly addressed. You still have those issues with badges giving those artificial boosts, those automatic results, you know, just by a single button press or just being in the vicinity. And again, that's not skill gap. And I want to bring up a comment in our Discord from Coach Des. Shout out to Coach Des, also in the top 10 this past week, talking about what skill gap actually is as far as finishing. Mentions making smart decisions, left versus right hand, layups versus dunks, floaters, push shots, reverses, hop steps, euro steps, etc. Picking that right move. You with dribbling, Derek, knowing how to get that rhythm, knowing when to have the player just make that automatic move with the left stick, when to engage the right stick to pull off a step back or a particular dribbling move. That is skill gap. Using the moves, using basketball strategy, not just relying on these artificial boosts. And again, conceptually, I do think badges have a place as far as boosting abilities a little bit within a reasonable amount. They certainly have a place with NBA players, being able to represent the best of the best and specialists and things like that. But it's just gone too far. The fact that you can have loadouts, that you can swap badges in and out, again, like a fighting game. The meta of a fighting game has come to basketball. And yeah, it doesn't create a genuine skill gap. A lot of it still comes down to quick time events, filling a meter, as we said last week, you know, the new dunk meter that's going to be in 2K27, or the expanded dunk meter, I suppose, plus these artificial boosts. Yeah, the concept of a skill gap is ridiculous. And again, the metagaming, the fact that you can buy your way to success, skip the grind, so you're not getting better on the sticks, you're not developing your stick skills along with your player, just pumping money into the game to upgrade those attributes quicker, to get the cap breakers, to get the badges. Yeah, what about that is skillful, Derek?
Yeah, then if you want a new build, because you're not a fan of the one that you already made, you have to start from scratch.
Or it's broken,
right?
Yeah.
And put all new money, into the game to get up to where you want to be, unless you want to go through that slog and through that grind. And I'm aware of the caps on certain builds. But like you stated, not only are there sometimes a way around it, but at the same time, the tiers are there, again, for a reason. To when you hit a tier, now you can get this badge that makes you overpowered, right? And that badge doesn't make you overpowered because of your skill. It makes you overpowered artificially.
Yeah.
Right? And that is the problem. But skill gap isn't meters and can sequences, right? Like, if I put you're talking about dribbling. If I am good at, crossing players over or going behind the back and then crossing over, change of direction, I get by my guy, and I'm about to throw it down or lay it in. And then I all of a sudden get stopped by a defender at the rim who is completely out of position, who would never be able to affect my shot or reach me in real life. And he explodes to my area, doesn't even actually block me. He hits there's separation between his hand and the ball, and he swats me. And the ball goes sailing out of bounds. That's not him being a great defender. That's because he has a rim protector badge that allowed a can sequence to take place. I was actually the skilled player in that sequence, right?
Yeah.
I actually blew by my guy, got to the rim, and should have been able to finish. But because he's out of position, but because he's decked out in a specific badge or multiple badges, he can affect my shot or swat me just being completely out of position. That is not true skill gap. I watched a lot of video from NBA 2K26 online play. I didn't want to, but at the time we were going to be talking about it on the next show. And the thing that people were complaining about the most was the fact that this game didn't represent true skill gap. Players were making shots that are incredibly low percentage in real life. I would venture to guess most players shoot under 30% from the field, sometimes under 20% from the field on these shots. Going 100 miles an hour to one spot and then triggering a step back and then shooting that step back over one or two defenders. Green release, nothing but net, over and over again. All of these off-balance shots. Meanwhile, these other gamers are shooting straight up and down shots with a ton of space and a ton of blue sky. Brick. That is not true skill gap. That's not a representation of real basketball in any way. And I understand this is a video game, but it's also a 5-on-5 sim, Andrew. It's supposed to be simulating the sport. And that is just so far off from what the sport is really like, and the skill sets of players are really like, and the shot percentages on these shots, that it ends up being absolutely ridiculous. I also want to point something out. You know, the term competitive scene is brought up all the time. The online scene, from everything I see from a gameplay perspective, is far easier. And I see all the shooting percentages as well, so I know this. It's far easier than playing the computer on Superstar or Hall of Fame or All-Star, etc. on, for example, NBA 2K26 and NBA 2K25. There is a 0% chance any of these guys are shooting those percentages against the CPU if they're playing on those difficulty levels. But on the online scene for NBA 2K over the last many years, even going back to like 2K18 and whatnot, it is so much easier to score on another human in this atmosphere. There is so much space on the court. It's just, sometimes I'll watch the online footage and it's dunk. And as defenders, you've talked about this before, a human is not going to react the same way as an AI opponent will. The AI opponent will often stick to you like glue, right? As a human defender, these guys online look absolutely helpless moving side to side or trying to get back on help defense and turn those bodies on the court. And yeah, that's the other thing that bothers me about this. There's this whole thing about skill gap and the competitive seed and blah, blah, blah and all of that. But I watched that action and it looked absolutely ridiculous. Nothing like true basketball. I'm not seeing a real skill gap. And these guys on defense online look absolutely helpless most of the time.
That's the great irony, isn't it? The so-called elite gamers, the competitive online gamers, talking about how great they are on the sticks, and, oh, we don't play with bots. Only casuals, unskilled casuals, filthy casuals, Derek, play against bots. But you put them against the CPU, and they have to deal with that. And suddenly they're not.
But how are we not competitive players against the AI?
I mean, of course.
That's the thing that's stupid about it. Of course we're still competitive. Right? I would say we're more competitive, especially if we're beating the AI on Hall of Fame or on Superstar and whatnot.
You're up for a challenge,
like
yeah.
I stated. Yeah, if you want the actual challenge, the ultimate challenge, and something that's actually more based on skill, even though I think there's a lot of issues with the offline gameplay as well, then you're actually going to be playing against the CPU on the higher difficulty levels. I would love to see some of these guys who play online exclusively. I would love to see them play against the higher difficulty level AI on NBA 2K and tell me which is more truly skill based.
Yeah, exactly. And you brought up the Rudy Gay dunk that you did in our 2K14 session. Again, set up by a great dribbling move. You reading the defense, you actually getting the momentum, the rhythm to pull off that move, get them off balance, and explode to the rim. That is skillful. That is the kind of thing that Coach Dez is referring to, picking the right move, picking your spots, basketball strategy, basketball skill on the virtual hardwood. That is the skill gap. And I saw a great comment on Reddit. I know, right? A great comment on Reddit. And I paraphrase here, said something along the lines of, people don't want a skill gap. They just want to fill meters, hit shots, get that dopamine hit, and feel like, I'm better than you, I'm great, you suck. That's how they look at a skill gap. Something that they can spam, something that they can succeed with, get that dopamine hit, get that consistent result from very mindless repetition of a particular move. To your point, what we see online, spamming those moves, the left-right cheese, all of that stuff, just to get that dopamine hit, just to be able to succeed time after time, just to sneer at people who can't pull off that move or don't want to pull off that move. They want to play actual basketball. That's what people talk about, when they talk about a skill gap. Can I succeed at the game? If I succeed at the game, I must be skillful. Therefore, I'm here. There's a skill gap. There's all you filthy casuals. And I thought that was very on point.
Yeah, and I think that the company's banking on that dopamine hit, right? They want people to seek to upgrade their player as much as possible so they can get that high from, one-upping the competition. And it doesn't matter if it's actually true skill-based or not, because what they want people to do is seek out those higher ratings, seek out those artificial boosts, whatever way they can get that hit, whatever way keeps them on the game and whatnot. And that's the way I look at it. So I do want to point something out. There was some pushback from Mike Wong's original tweet. And there's a lot of people in the comments stating, see, this is the problem with the game, but it should be more skill-based, ratings should matter more, etc. So Mike Wong, and he actually posted this after I had asked this week's community question. He states, the goal of my previous poll was just to gauge the community's expectations of the strength of badges compared to ratings. The percentages I threw out were completely arbitrary and not a commentary on how shooting will look in 2K27 at all. Let me ask another way. How much should ratings matter versus badges in shot success? And again, that's kind of just asking the same question, just without the percentages, right? And I appreciate the fact that he's putting it out there. But again, I'm not really a fan of how this is being worded. I don't think it's, trying to have a discussion about true skill gap. It's more asking, how much do you want your artificial boosts to matter? And that's a strange conversation to have right now because the game just added 19 new badges, Andrew.
No, exactly. And another comment I saw on Reddit that was sadly true as well. This person said that basketball fans have been pushed out. And this is something that we've talked about here on the show before, Derek, and I've touched on it in articles as well. It really does feel like basketball fans, the hardcore hoop heads, the sim fans, have been pushed out by NBA 2K. Or they say, you've still got offline play that still suffers because of these changes that are being made, these design choices that are being made for the online scene. Those mechanics still carry over to the offline scene. You can tune offline and online differently, but the mechanics, the underlying gameplay mechanics, are going to be the same, and we suffer as a result. And as we said before, NBA 2K found its success, took over NBA Live, because it was making the better sim game. It was more realistic, more strategic, more authentic. It started getting better critical reception, started outselling NBA Live. NBA Live made many blunders, of course, but 2K delivered the product that we dreamed of, this authentic NBA sim. We've talked before about going back to NBA 2K9, just being blown away by how realistic, how authentic it is, how much strategy is involved in a 7th generation game. 2 generations old, and yet it's more authentic on the NBA side of things, on the sim side of things. And the games that followed NBA 2K9, really up to 2K17, were just going from strength to strength in that regard. And it was fantastic. The game was succeeding. It was just blowing Live away. Again, Live had mechanical issues as well. But again, 2K just so much more authentic, delivering what sim gamers wanted. And now that it's the only game on the market, and this is the other problem with having no competition, is that NBA 2K is trying to be everything to everyone, trying to cater to these different crowds, to the online crowd, the elitists, the offline sim fans. It's definitely leaning more towards the online crowd these days. The MyPlayer-based modes, so that is a problem for the offline scene. But again, hardcore fans, sim fans, people who want that realistic experience in a video game. And people say, it's a video game, it's supposed to be fun. I mean, first of all, it's a sim game, so being authentic, being realistic is fun. That's the point. That's the differentiation from an arcade game or a sim arcade hybrid, where you do have that looser approach to a realistic style or a completely wacky style, as the case may be. That's why we have different games to cater to those different tastes. Now 2K is the only game on the market, or the only one coming out every year, so it's trying to cater to these different preferences. And of course, cater to people beyond hardcore basketball fans. And I don't want to gatekeep here, Derek, because I think basketball gaming should be for everyone. But the fact of the matter is, is that we're being pushed out as the hardcore sim heads, the sim fans. So don't get on us about gatekeeping when we've been pushed out of our own hobby.
Yeah, I don't think it's just the hardcore hoop heads or sim fans that want a different on-court basketball experience. People want to be out there playing basketball. The average basketball gamer wants a more realistic basketball approach. They don't want the game to be flooded with artificial boosts and canned sequences. The number one thing that people want when they play a sports game, or the majority of people want, is to have control over the action, control over their player, control over the moves that they're doing. You know, they want to be able to drive to the hoop, and if they have blue sky, they should be able to finish. They don't want to be transferred into a body that has a badge. They don't want to be, swatted out of the air by a player transferring over to them. They don't want that. Right?
They don't want to fill a meter.
They want to be able to, they don't want to be staring at a meter. Right? Whether it be on a shot or on a dunk or on a layup. They don't want to be restricted in all areas, inside the 3-point line because of all the suction, right? They don't want to be skating all over the court. They don't want to be constantly be dragged in to other players. They want to be able to have a viable post game. They don't want to be hitting invisible walls. All of that stuff. That is not just for hardcore gamers. That is not just for sim heads. That's for the average basketball gamer, right? They want that control. They want that experience. And that's where they're missing the mark in such a big way. And you know what? I'm seeing a lot of the same complaints for FC 27. And you look at the gameplay from FIFA 14 and the graphics and everything they were doing there from a realism perspective and compare it to the new FC 27 game. And the FC 27 game almost looks cartoony. I don't know how else to word it. The players don't move realistically. They're changing directions awkwardly. They almost have like a Gumby look to them. And it's not being talked about in a favorable way as a result by the average gamer. But if you look back at what the people were saying about FIFA 14 and FIFA 17 and whatnot, and you look at that footage, it's mostly positive. This isn't just happening in the basketball gaming space, right? This is happening in sports gaming. And that is a major red flag. These games are not made with the same quality anymore as far as feel and control. There's so many outside factors that are now coming into play here. There's the microtransactions. There's the constant push to have people online and constantly upgrading their player and trying to push people to get interested in downloading more DLC and buying more DLC, etc. Yeah. And it's not just NBA 2K. This is happening in sports gaming, and it's sad. I also want to point out that my brother and I have been playing a lot of NBA 2K15 lately, and it is leaps and bounds better in so many ways than NBA 2K26.
The foot planning
is unreal, right? The foot planning is absolutely excellent. There isn't the slow motion side by sides. There isn't the constant suction. The action is way more organic. It feels like you have way more control on the sticks. In the mid-range is actually viable. Imagine that. The post-game, shooting the basketball, shooting is far better. NBA 2K15 on both offense and defense feels a lot better. And I'm not the only one saying this. There's a lot of people that go back and play these games and they're like, man, I can't believe how much better these games feel on the sticks. And a lot of people think they look better. They're more appealing on the eyes as far as like the atmosphere, the arenas, the crowd reactions, the jersey tech, some of the body models, all of that stuff. Just what happened, right? And like I stated, I already pre-ordered NBA 2K27. I'm going to play it. I'm going to find some way to enjoy, parts of the game, whether it be the WNBA or using Legends with my brother to get stats and make highlights, all of that stuff. But it doesn't mean I don't see what is going on and that my experience with these newest 2Ks isn't negatively impacted.
And again, NBA 2K15 has signature skills, a precursor to badges. It does have that concept, but they're not overdone. They work. You don't have players, real or my players, with 60, 70 badges. So it's not overloading with artificial boosts. The boosts are more balanced, better done, so you don't have those issues in those games. The original concept of things like badges, signature skills, traits in NBA Live, there's merit there, but it's just gone too far. There's no balance. It has made the game very canned, very artificial. And I've seen your NBA 2K15 highlights, as I'm sure many of our listeners have as well, because they've shown up in the top 10, and you see those awesome dunks. And you can appreciate those awesome dunks because you're not looking at a meter.
Imagine how stupid that Rudy Gay dunk would have looked if you were staring at a giant meter.
Exactly. You would not be able to enjoy it. You would not be able to enjoy these great highlights. You're looking at the meter. Even if you're not looking at the meter and you're just timing it, it's still popping up there. It's still distracting. It still doesn't look good on the highlight. So yeah, it's ridiculous. It's not skillful. It's a quick time event. I mean, sure, you choose the animation to some extent with the Pro Stick, but like Coach Des said, it's about choosing the right move. Finishing with the left or right hand, what kind of elusive move you perform before that to set up the drive, to elude the defender, to explode to the rim, to set up an explosion that you made with Rudy Gay. That is skillful. That is where skill gap comes in. It's not just timing a release. It's not just hitting a button and waiting for an animation to play out. It's not just waiting for the artificial boost of a badge to kick in and generate a result. I mean, if timing is a skill gap, then Sony's NBA series with its green releases, would you call that a skill gap in that game? No one's calling that a skill gap. We had shot timing since, the 90s, since the 80s with basketball video games. Shot timing has always been a thing, except in Live 08 when they took it away for some reason. Just relied too much on the hotspots.
Well, shot timing is one second. Shot timing is a real skill gap in real life.
Sure.
Right? When you shoot, right? That's the thing. That is a real thing. And that's why I think that can still be related to true skill gap in a video game. But these meters are crap.
Yeah.
These meters are crap and they don't function properly and they're not realistic as it relates to when defense comes in, when you have to release your shot. Because in real life, Andrew, you can hit shots that you don't perfectly release, right? Obviously, if you have the optimal release on a shot and it feels good, then you're going to hit that shot more often than when you don't shoot it right. But there are countless times in real life, I play basketball, where, you'll shoot a shot a little bit faster than you normally would because of the closeout, but it still feels good and you can hit that from time to time. There's times when you'll, in the mid-range, on fadeaways, shots around the rim and whatnot, where you will release it at a non-optimal point because it makes sense to get around the defense, and you at times can hit those shots, right? My opinion is they've gone too far with these meters, and they're attaching a meter to everything, and the meters don't work properly, and they don't make sense from a timing standpoint either, and it doesn't represent true skill gap. And if you're playing basketball and you're looking at meters the majority of the time, that is ridiculous, right? Who makes a basketball video game where there's very little appeal to shooting, dunking, and throwing alley-oops, right? It wouldn't be me. No. Right? I wouldn't make a game like that. So, yeah, the whole thing is ridiculous in my opinion.
And I brought up NBA Live 08 there. The Xbox 360 PlayStation 3 version took away shot timing, just based it all on hotspots, players, tendencies, attributes. And I saw what they were going for, but to your point, they did take away some skill gap. You didn't have to time the shot anymore. It was completely based on the player's abilities. I see what they're going for, but you weren't in control. And like you said, that's what gamers want to feel in control, want to make things happen. That is what people are talking about when they talk about a skill gap, but their definition of a skill gap, that's what we're questioning. And one final point, as much as I want games to reward skill, reward proper input, I've always felt it's important for basketball games to have a reliable move. And to me, dunking has been that move. It is the highest percentage shot in basketball. It is right at the rim. If all else fails, get it inside, throw down a dunk, high percentage shot. And of course, you do balance that out with physicality inside, good defense, preventing the drive. I'm not saying you should be able to dunk at will in a sim game, but it is handy to be able to get inside when all else fails and get that layup and get that dunk and not have it be an extremely difficult shot. I think we need the tools in a basketball video game to fall back on, something to rely on, some kind of go-to strategy, go-to move that we have an easy shot that we can take. Just like real life. Get it inside, get that high percentage shot. Players do miss inside, they do miss easy ones, but they are making it at a high clip. I like having something you can fall back on. Dunks and layups, inside shots, obviously being high percentage, that is something to fall back on. But again, balance it out with interior defense, with players who can cut off the drive. Shouldn't be totally easy, but to make dunking and layups so challenging. Look at NBA Elite 11 having to rotate the stick to make a layup. How awkward and clumsy that was. The easy shots in a basketball video game should not be difficult to execute.
I want to point something out. I don't think that wide open dunks are going to be tough to execute.
Fair.
Right? But you shouldn't be staring at a meter and have to time those in a basketball video game. That is ridiculous. So just to let you know, slam dunks are the highest percentage shot in basketball, usually converted at an 89% to 93% success rate across the entire league. So if people are going to struggle with this dunk meter, if it isn't implemented properly, like so many meters in the past with NBA 2K, yeah, there's going to be a problem if people are missing them half the time or even a quarter of the time even. But I don't think it's the fact that they're going to be hard when you try, when you do a wide open dunk. Although I'm thinking that it might be a challenge at times because of the speed of some of these dunks. Like, how are they going to make that work? Right. But even if it's not hard, it's the fact that you have to stare at a meter and you're not even watching the basketball action. Right. In order to complete these dunks. That is ridiculous. I also want to point something out. You mentioned earlier about the offline play being affected by online play, even if you are playing the AI. Absolutely. That is one of the biggest problems. All of that badge BS and all of the suction and all of the unrealistic sequences that happen on the court that you see online and everything, you see that offline big time when playing the AI, and you feel that on the sticks, and it is super frustrating. In fact, I think it gets potentially even more frustrating when playing against the AI with all of this. So yeah, absolutely ridiculous.
At one final point, people say, oh, you just want to press a button and make a dunk or make a layup. That's not skillful. But the same people will be very comfortable with equipping an ankle breaker badge, hitting the stick with a repetitive movement, just one particular reliable move, and breaking an ankle. What's the difference, Derek?
Yeah, agreed. 100%. I think the problem is that that's the way online play often looks, is people just absolutely doing the most unrealistic, ridiculous spamming of their dribble and just easily getting by doing that, and easily, getting by their defender, or just going in for a wide open dunk by doing that ridiculous stuff. And, or just doing a bunch of spam dribbles, not getting anywhere with it, but then doing a step back. And because you have a specific badge, you can time it, and shooting like a step back three from Curry range, and it greens and it explodes the net. Like, that's not true skill gap, right? He didn't do anything special there. And by the way, I also want to point out, these games are also supposed to be fun, right? We talk about the skill gap piece. It is important in sports games to have some sort of skill gap, because it is supposed to be a competitive environment. It's sports, Andrew, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You're playing a sports video game. However, and even in arcade video games, it's that way, right? There's a skill gap in NBA Street Volume 2.
Sure.
Right? That's why there's players that are better than others when they go head to head. There's skill gap in NBA Jam. There's skill gap in NFL Blitz. All of that stuff. The point is that the game needs to do a good job of making the game have skill gap, but also be fun. And the way that you do that, in my opinion, is give the user complete control, right? You give them control over the action. You don't have all of these artificial sequences happening and whatnot, or at least keep them to a minimum. So yeah, and I think that, NBA 2K has, for the most part, missed the mark in that way, especially since 2K18.
And of course, accessibility is important, being able to cater to different skill levels, allowing people to get into the game and get good on the sticks. You need to be introduced to that and develop those skills, increase those skills. So, yeah, accessibility is vital.
So let's get to this week's community question. I asked basketball gamers, would you agree that this question and the way artificial boosts aka badges, work in NBA 2K goes completely against true skill gap. And I pointed to Mike Wong's tweet and stated, so the same 100 shots, but a heavy increase in percentage just because you have badges, or an increase in percentage because you have badges. So we did get a bunch of responses. So MP3 Gaming at MP3_gaming states, I don't like it. It's not realistic. Who shoots 70% regularly on a nightly basis in the NBA? Oh yeah, I forgot. The game is aimed at park playing, VC paying, dress up Barbie players, and not actual NBA anymore, sadly. So yeah, the whole Ronnie 2K Barbie dress up game.
Yeah, exactly. And I love that comment coming up because that is something that should haunt Ronnie 2K, quite frankly. And MP3 has brought that up before in response to a previous community question that the game is very much being designed around my career and my player and the connected online modes. And once again, the offline scene, the traditional 5-on-5 gameplay, the sim aspect of gameplay suffers for it.
Stasho Bro at Nate Stasho, Lava One Legend, friend of the show, states, so the skill gap refers to users just being able to time green releases with a variety of players who have different shooting animations. I remember making the jump from NBA Live 2006 to 2K11, and shooting was by far the hardest part of the game. No, the skill gap, Nate, goes beyond that. It's what we already mentioned on the show as far as if you play basketball better, like, you know when to take your shots. You know how much separation you need to take a shot. You know how to do the dribbles to effectively get by a player and score. You know how to time your release for your player, just like in real life, Nate, you play basketball. So, you do have an optimal release on your shot, and you're going to shoot a higher percentage in real life if you shoot it that way. Knees bent the same, release point the same, or at least similar, etc. On defense, it's being able to cut a player off, knowing when to time that steal, knowing how to, when to use the right stick defense or when to actually jump for a block, all of that stuff. Like, that's what skill gap is. It's not just tied to, can you time your shot? There are a whole bunch of factors that factor into being a good basketball player, right? And that's true skill gap, not players artificially getting stopped and blocked because somebody has a badge that makes them overpowered unrealistically. That's not true skill gap. True skill gap isn't being able to, be decked out with badges, which makes you be able to hit step back threes from any spot on the floor. That's not true skill gap. So yeah, if you want to talk about bad shooting mechanics, I would say, over the last 6 or 7 releases for NBA 2K, the shooting mechanics have been pretty damn poor. And I don't think they're a realistic representation from basketball in any way.
Yeah, the decision-making, going into your bag, knowing what move to make, is a big part of skill in real basketball. I'd liken it to a very athletic player who can jump out of the gym, jump over players, throw it down, but not necessarily make the best decisions with the ball on the drive. Conversely, you may have someone who is not quite as athletic. They can still get up and posterize someone. They're not quite as athletic, but they can make better decisions with the ball. They can find gaps in the defense. They're not just relying on their athleticism, their speed, their jumping ability. They may have that as well, but they can also pick their spots, see the gaps in defense, make those right moves. And to that point, that's why players who aren't as athletic, at least from an NBA standpoint, they're still far more athletic than the general population, but players like Nikola Jokic, like Doncic, like Larry Bird back in the day, they have the smarts, they have the skill, they can see those gaps, they can make those moves, elude the defenders. It's not just about having those natural abilities, kind of those real-life badges, if you will.
Yeah, and there's skill gap when Nate and Roger play NBA Live 2001 against each other. I see it, right? Using players to their strengths, trying to take the smart shots. How much space do I have for this shot? I'm going to shoot it. Timing of the release is important in those games and whatnot. Yeah, there's skill gap there, and that decides your games, right? T Gentry at Bucky_T states, absolutely goes against true skill gap. I also feel like adding more badges deeply hurts the gameplay. As far as player movement, the clunky feel etc. Yeah, I think player movement has gone downhill dramatically since NBA 2K18. Just something as simple as changing directions, they don't do it as well anymore. The players kind of stutter and move in a herky-jerky way, just doing very simple movements. And I definitely experienced that. Munda Bompton at Poopton_man states, at Mike Wong, NBA 2K has been with us since 1999. Fans who started as teens are pushing 40, now playing with their own kids. Please give us the option to turn off the alley-oop and dunk meters, at least in offline modes. 25 years of loyalty deserves a toggle/radio button to turn off. And yeah, I think that should be a no-brainer. We didn't ask for this, right? Don't ruin our experience, dunking the ball or throwing alley-oops, etc., just because you want to add something to online play. I don't think that's for the consumer. In a way, I think it's anti-consumer.
Oh, it absolutely is. Like we said in a previous show, it's foisting it upon gamers. People weren't asking for this, or maybe a loud minority were asking for it, but sim gamers, offline gamers, weren't demanding this. And I don't think a lot of online gamers were either. Again, maybe a loud minority, but this is not something there was a consensus about. We absolutely need this. And again, offline play should be customizable. It should be accessible. Allow us to turn those meters and that timing off.
Power at Power Got Now states, yes, but a true skill gap is a silly goal for a basketball game. A true skill gap means everyone uses the same builds, ratings, animations, and abilities. What people want is basketball realism with skill separating players, and badges help to represent unique player strengths. And I couldn't disagree with that first part more. A true skill gap is a silly goal for a basketball game. Yeah, we're not on the same page there. And that's not what a true skill gap means. Even if everybody had the same builds, ratings, animations, and abilities, the true skill gap would still be present. Why? Because not everybody has the same basketball knowledge. Not everybody has the same coordination. Not everybody is going to know what the right shot is to take, what's the right move to pull off at that time. Not everybody's going to have the same skill when they're dribbling or attacking the rim, or the same ability to find that optimal release point more often than not. So no, I completely disagree with that first line. Where he cleans it up a little bit, though, is what people want is basketball realism with skill separating players. But he states, and badges help to represent unique player strengths. No, what a badge is, honestly, is it's an artificial boost that makes a specific strength overpowering. And it can make something that's not a strength or something that that person is not good at, it makes them good at it. It makes it viable. And I think that's the opposite of skill gap.
Yeah, like I said, signature skills, badges, etc. can work if properly implemented. They worked well enough. 2K13, 14, 15, they were signature skills before they revamped into badges, and how that's just exploded with the online scene. What I will say is that when builds were a bit more standardized back in NBA 2K17, before all the min-maxing, before all the metagaming came in, I think it did play to the skill gap, the supposed skill gap, a little bit better, because you didn't have all the min-maxing, all the ridiculous loadouts, etc. You picked your playstyle for your my player, and there was more of a standard skill set, standard set of badges, etc. So there was more balance in that regard. And I've said it before, the more choice we've had with my player builds, the worse the game has gotten, because it has led to all this min-maxing, this metagaming, nothing to do with basketball or a skill gap.
Imagine saying that a true skill gap is a silly goal for a sports game. Not just a basketball game, a sports game. And I don't really care how many followers this guy has. He has about 200K followers on Twitter. I completely disagree with his statement. Jay at jcole2k states, badges are fine, but they shouldn't be weighed more than attributes. 85% attributes, 15% badges, maybe even less. So he's stating that attributes should factor in more, and that's actually a common sentiment. Sammy Mack at Sammy Mack 1071 states, exactly. In 2K23, there was an event in the theater that was 75 overall and below on the ones court, and the highest badges you could have equipped was silver if you had any at all. And that was the best event ever because it was purely based on skill instead of getting bailed out by badges. And yeah, so the badges didn't feel as overpowering And as a result, he felt it was more skill-based and he had more fun.
And that goes back to what I said about NBA 2K17's builds, that they were more standardized, that they weren't overpowered. You didn't have really OP builds. I'm not saying that they were all made equal. I know that X kind of went with a build that helped us but wasn't as fun to play with, but was still very useful to NLSC Thrillho. But the fact that they were standard skill sets, standard sets of badges, yeah, it's kind of like that you didn't have these OP builds that you just couldn't contend with unless you were overloaded with a ridiculous amount of badges as well. And to Jay's point, yeah, if you've got 90 in three-point shooting, you shouldn't need a badge to be effective with that rating.
Moving over to Discord, QB1120 states, it's BS and a crutch for players that actually lowers the skill needed to play the game. Even before reading the rest of his response, exactly. That is the way I look at it. It lowers the skill needed to be effective in those areas that badges help out with. He continues, it almost makes ratings useless, as a player who doesn't have badges would be less likely to make a shot than someone who has slightly worse ratings but with badges. Some badges are good for differentiating similar players to add a bit of variety, but those that affect gameplay as important as shooting have no business being in the game. But then we've also discussed how the game is essentially a meter-filling game, and I'd rather have it rely more on ratings and just focus on the basketball than worrying how well I'm filling up a meter. And I know you love that.
Yeah, spot on. And I know people don't want RNG in the games. They want that skillful input. They want that to matter. So I totally get that. I will say that going back and playing games like 2K14 that do have RNG with shooting, I find they still work pretty well. And certainly from a sim aspect, from an authenticity aspect, playing on the NBA side of things, I think they work out better. Certainly more realistic anyway. And it's not like it prevents you from hitting shots. But yeah, calling it a meter-filling game, pretty spot on.
KidCash202 states, in a couple of years, 2K should just remove badges completely and then bring them back 5 years later as a new feature. Anything they are using badges for now could very well be accomplished through the exclusive use of a 0 to 99 rating scale for all attributes, like how things used to be. So I had a response underneath. I stated, they need to make the artificial boosts a big part of the game, not for the consumer, but to make money. If you don't have those in the game, people won't be putting in more real money to upgrade their players as often. And out of the gate, they wouldn't suck as bad. People also won't want to start over with a new build as often if there are no artificial boosts either. And when someone has to start from scratch, they lose all the upgrades they put into their original player, which equals more money in 2K's pockets when they have to build a new player. I also stated this push for all these artificial boosts has everything to do with lining the company's pockets. It all goes towards the bottom line. And that's truly how I feel about this in general. And I continued, because from my understanding, you have to hit certain attributes, tiers, before a badge becomes available. So while you don't directly purchase badges, you are pushed and pressured to buy VC to upgrade your attributes to get yourself to a point where you can unlock those badges. It's all connected. And in response to that, Coach Des states, correct. And now they're adding things like Max +1, which lets you choose a badge and upgrade it a level. Silver to gold, gold to Hall of Fame, etc. This can only be earned through upgrading the season rewards, Battle Pass, that you have to purchase. At the end of the season, it goes away and you have to purchase the next season and get to the required season level again to get it back. So yeah, I just feel like the entire system related to badges, related to these artificial boosts, is just tied into how much more money they can get people to spend on the game.
I think it's undeniable at this point, although people certainly do try to downplay it, some shills, content creators, etc. But yeah, it's definitely tied into those recurrent revenue mechanics. It's not made with a true skill gap in mind, I think. I certainly don't think it's made with fun in mind, with accessibility in mind. You are punished for not knowing the meta. You're punished for not paying more. People say, "I'll just go no money spent." You don't have to pay. But if you don't, you're stuck with a grind that isn't fun. You know, these are games. They shouldn't be work. Certainly you should put effort into upgrading a player, but there's a difference between effort and basically making it a job and finding ways to maximize the grind and maximize the VC earnings in ways that have nothing to do with basketball, nothing to do with a fun activity, which is what basketball gaming, or indeed any video game, should be. So yeah, absolutely ridiculous. The fact that they're tying it into the season passes, the battle passes, is gross. Should be called out. Unfortunately, as we said before, at this point, the community is very numb to it, just kind of rolls with the punches there. So yeah, it's a shame what's happened to the game.
So do we receive any other responses on other social media platforms?
We did receive a couple of responses on other platforms. Allgap liked the post and responded, "The sooner you recognise that 2K is a pay-to-win game with a $70 minimum buy-in, the sooner all of this stuff makes sense." And yeah, that goes right back to that point you just made, Derek.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that that's been killing a lot of different sports games, other games as well, other live service games. But yeah, I think it's having an incredible negative impact on gaming.
Jumping over to Blue Sky, Tip of the Spear says, "I like badges for further differentiation between players, but like most things, when done in excess, it becomes a problem. My first thought is always Vinnie Johnson. A badge was needed to account for a guy who would get extremely hot in spurts, microwave, his nickname of course, Derek, and then cold. And yeah, like I said, I don't mind badges, traits, signature skills as a concept when done well, to his point, when it's not done in excess. But unfortunately, we're well past that point. They have become artificial boosts. They're not just boosting players in their specialty or boosting the all-time greats in some way above their peers. It's become very my-player-oriented. They've become very powerful, very phony. So what could be a good concept, and what arguably was a meritorious concept originally, has now just ruined the game.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it can be helpful when you're playing the NBA side of things offline to have a small separation for, say, a dunker like Jason Richardson and then a dunker like Evan Fournier, because Evan Fournier can dunk, right? You want Jason Richardson to do those more explosive dunks. You want him to be able to posterize a little bit more. That is a little bit different. And they also weren't overpowering in those old titles. 2K15, 2K16, 2K17. The badges weren't overpowering. But when you're talking about that online play and you're talking about that online scene, and that's what Mike Wong is talking about in that tweet, and you want to talk about things like skill gap and true skill gap and all of that stuff, then yeah, I think that the game has to have a minimum of artificial boosts. And also, like we stated before, people shouldn't have to be staring at meters, so they should be able to focus on the basketball action.
It comes down to execution. Absolutely. We talk about the shot aiming in NBA 2K17. Compare that to the shot aiming in NBA 2K21, or certainly NBA Elite 11. Those two were not done well. 2K17, we actually kind of liked the concept there.
Yeah, it didn't work too bad in 2K17. It actually kind of worked as it should, and I think it was fun to use at times.
And finally, over on Facebook, Brad has a similar point. Says, does it go against skill gap? I guess, but badges help make the players more resemble the actual player. The one that immediately comes to mind are corner threes. A real player who is better in the corners should have that badge. And again, that goes back to what we said, that it has a point with NBA players, with giving players that specialty, that little boost that makes sense. But the way they implement it now, the way it just becomes an automatic result, a very phony result, is undesirable.
Yeah, and on the NBA side, how do you combat that, right? That's a part of skill, actually. It's if you're playing against that player, how are you defending him? Are you denying him off ball, making sure that he can't catch it? How soon are you getting out to him? We deal with that when we're playing against the PC. Sometimes on various basketball games, certain players are overpowered in certain areas. So how are you covering them? How are you using your skill on defense in order to shut that player down or limit his effectiveness? So there could be skill gap that comes into play there.
But thank you to everybody who joined in the conversation this week. Always great to hear from you. I think a lot of people feel, as we do, Derek, that the badges have just become ridiculously overpowered. They're too impactful on the gameplay. They don't represent skill gap. And furthermore, when a lot of people talk about skill gap, what they're talking about isn't really skillful or a skill gap at all.
Artificial boosts, meters, suction, and poor foot planning are the main things that I think are hurting the user's experience. That's my opinion. I think they're the main drivers of the gameplay going downhill.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. So please keep the conversation going, but in the meantime, that has brought us to the end of this week's show. Thank you for tuning in, and a reminder you can catch us every week on the NLSC, our YouTube channel, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other podcast platforms. Also, both we and the NLSC are on social media, and would appreciate a follow. So Derek, go ahead and plug the handles.
Yep, you can reach me on X, formerly known as Twitter, at D for3G and at D for384. I'm also on the NLSC, D for3, and on YouTube, D for3.
As for me, I'm Andrew in the forum and Andrew NLSC on X and Blue Sky. The NLSC is on X, Facebook, and Blue Sky at the NLSC. We're also NLSC Basketball on Instagram and Threads. We're on YouTube at NBA Live Series Center. And of course, give a look to the NLSC itself, nba-live.com, for all things basketball gaming. So, thank you again for tuning in, and until next time, I'm Andrew.
And I'm Derek.
Go get buckets, everyone!